My name is Patrick Webb. Some of you may know me as a ornamental and heritage plasterer, but I also teach as a professor at the Classic Planning Institute and was the founder of our group here, the Traditional Architecture Gathering. We're in day 3 now. It's really been a marvelous event thus far. So I'm up next, so try not to disappoint. We're going to be talking about towards the next traditional architecture gathering, but we'll probably first begin with a slight look backward at how the tag first began. Then next up, we're going to be talking about beyond the style wars. And we have a bonus round to look forward to as well. Some of our friends from INTBAU Germany, a newly formed chapter, will be talking on the theme of the road to affordable, classy urbanism. So we originally had our program closing at 2 p.m., at least to go into the breakout rooms, but we'll be extending a bit further, perhaps another hour or so. And then after that, we'll kind of conclude and see each other for a bit of a cocktail hour. So without further ado, I will now invite Professor Jack Duncan from the American College of the Building Arts, who will be leading our session on Towards Tag 5. Professor Duncan.
Patrick, thank you so much. And thank everybody for showing up. I'm like noticing in the chat down here, everybody seems to be in rainy locations. I'm here in sunny Charleston, so I feel very blessed to be having the sunshine come through the clerestory windows here. But again, thank you so much. I've been fortunate to be a part of these gatherings since the beginning and being good friends with a lot of you and making new friends with many of you in this tag gathering, which is by far, I think, the most we've ever had, which is really, really interesting. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit is I think at this point, Mr. Webb and Dr. Burris probably go without introduction, but of course, I'm sure many of you don't know who I am. Like Patrick said, I'm the chair of classical architecture and allied arts here at the American College of the Building Arts. It's the newest accredited specialization here in Charleston, and so we have a deep interest in everything that goes on with these gatherings. And so and my perspective is uniquely educational, and also I was really happy to see the student session yesterday. That was really fantastic. So enough about me, but I do want to talk about kind of the sequence going through on this in this particular session. What I want to do is to kind of direct a couple of questions to both Dr. Burris and Mr. Webb regarding the tag events, regarding also the Classical Planning Institute and a few other things. And then at the end, I really would like for all of you, the audience, to have in the chat box both questions that you want to ask the panelists, Dr. Burris and Mr. Webb, but also ideas that you have for topics going towards tag 5. I think that's really, really important. And I think we all believe that that's really important. And probably one of the most valuable aspects of the tag is that it is purely kind of an Athenian democracy where we all have a little stone that we place in the vase, right? We all kind of have our direct vote, which is really a beautiful thing. And that way we can kind of get to that at the end. We'd love to allow for at least a half an hour of both question and answer. And also maybe we touch on some of the topics that you all have brought up. I'm looking forward to that. So let's jump right into it, I think. Again, let me just remind you, please be typing both the questions and the topics that you have throughout the session. Don't feel the need to type it right at the end. We'll go back through and do that, okay? So Mr. Webb, I may start with you, and for those of us that have been here that maybe need a reminder, and those of us that this is our first time, maybe just kind of give us a brief history of TAG, how it came about, what its purpose is perhaps, and has that purpose evolved or changed since the kind of inception?
Okay, very good. I prepared for this, took a bit notes, since it's a bit of a history lesson. I want to make sure that I kind of got it relatively right. So TAG stands for the Traditional Architecture Gathering. And really its genesis came from the TradArc listserv in the University of Miami. It had three principles that we started off with.
Hello. Yeah.
If you could turn off your, thank you. Yeah. All right. So there's three observations that I had that I really appreciated when I first joined the TradArc listserv. That it was a platform that seemed to be relatively uncensored. It was very democratic. You had, anyone from someone new, a craftsman, not even an architect, was able to contribute just as much as someone, who had many responsibilities, perhaps in university or other organizations. And that spoke to its diversity as well. A lot of very different people from very different backgrounds. So I had written some articles about that and just noting it and seeing the value of that type of platform that I was introduced to. There were vibrant discussions. I'll mention a couple of them that if any of you been on that listserv, you might be aware of. The CNU is burning. That was one that would kind of got into a debate about, is traditional architecture relevant to traditional urbanism or planning, or are they just completely separate concerns? I had brought up what makes something traditional. Is it just being the formal qualities enough, or do we have to take into account it's the social, the material aspects of architecture? We had myself and Andres Duani, who most of you know, often got into Rose. He kind of described it as a garden party. And, in a sense, he was right. Those conversations were hot and heavy there, but they never seemed to get out of that. So he was proposing the idea of a gathering to, jump outside the walls. And, but his perspective was that it really should be exclusive. Only the very best of us should go, not all of us. And as it turns out, it was quite an expensive thing. And it was to have a strict agenda. And so myself and a few others took a kind of a different view. And so we counter-proposed what became the traditional architecture gathering. It was to be open and inclusive. Anybody from the listserv was welcome. We've all been following these conversations. It was to be free, at least to the folks who came. Those of us who hosted it, we were going to foot the cost to feed everybody and provide a venue. And the scheduling was going to be open session. So we already knew the things we wanted to talk about. We've been talking about them for months or even years. So everyone came with their ideas in mind, and then we quickly organized ourselves. And so it turned out that the great many from the listserv was really for the idea, and it materialized right there at the American College of the Building Arts in Charleston. That was our first one. Then we moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, Richmond, and Washington, D.C. was to be our next location. And unfortunately, that was last year about this time. And so there was, COVID arising and things where people were unsure of whether or not they should gather together in person. And I certainly wasn't ready to go to a virtual platform yet. It was a total mystery to me. I've learned a bit in a year's time. At the same time, the listserv itself was beginning to kind of disintegrate, and so the issue was over basically censorship. And there was it happened in kind of two stages where political partisanship started to kind of really raise its head. The first, this was before Charlottesville. This was probably about 3 years ago. A lot of us were talking about what to do about these Confederate monuments. And this was well before the incident in Charlottesville, because we knew the public were talking about it. And we had people who felt that, it should just remain the decisions of government bureaucracy on the one hand. Others felt that, it doesn't matter where they are, all Confederate monuments must be raised. But I think there was a lot of us basically said, well, we have a chance, we have an opportunity to really talk this through. Unfortunately, that conversation was really squashed on the listserv, and many of us left at that time. I was one of them, but I did come back because I thought Tag 4 was important, and that was because the executive order draft was kind of leaked at that time. And again, I didn't have a strong position on this issue, but it was something everybody was really interested in and fixated on the time. Should it not exist? Should we support it? Is there some sort of middle ground? At least we should talk about the issue. And that again became a very suppressed discussion. And so, I ended up getting thrown off the listserv at that time while I was trying to organize a conference, and was never given a reason why. And so we were looking at that time for, it was a very frustrating time. I had actually given up on the idea of the traditional architecture gathering altogether. But I think Dr. Burris kind of pulled me back in, and he felt that we could make this happen if we went to a virtual platform. So that's kind of the history of the traditional architecture gathering. I would like to just say a couple of more things about how I think it could slightly return a little bit more to its original spirit. And I think this has been an unparalleled success. I mean, it's just been fantastic. We've had hundreds of people attend this. Presentations have been fantastic and great. But as Professor Duncan was alluding to, we're thinking structurally how we might improve things so that we allow much more opportunity for the panelists to talk to one another, as well as leaving a lot of time for those in the audience to field for us to field their questions. And so perhaps, a minimum of 20 to 30 minutes per session to engage the audience. Because if you can imagine, if we're all there together in a room, this type of active conversation was going back and forth. It was exhilarating, and it was so so productive. And it's like, how can we in a virtual platform try to mimic that type of experience? And I think we have to make time for it. I think that's probably the most important thing. So anyway, that's kind of the past. I'll probably hand it over to Dr. Burris, and he can make his own observations on the beginnings of TAG.
Sure. And Dr. Burris, I'd like to maybe narrow the question a little bit, kind of going back to the end of what Patrick was talking about regarding, this kind of this egalitarian relationship amongst all of the people. And we talked about how at the end of the session we're going to, we're hoping that we're going to get some good questions and ideas for topics going forward. Do you have ideas about what you think, in particular, maybe topics may be for the Tag 5, or things that have arisen over the last couple of days that have kind of sparked your interest?
Well, thank you, Professor Webb and Professor Duncan. Yes, I started out. It all started out for me, at least in this round, although I've been building up to it for about 20 years, 25 years now, I think. My little history is that 25 years ago, I had an intellectual conversion from being a modernist to being a classicist. When I was doing my PhD about modernism, I asked the question, what is modernism? And when I found out what it was, I realized it didn't have too much meat. So then the next question was, how did it happen? How did it occur? I'm writing a book about that. It's called Romantic Intentions, The Pleasure of Beauty and the Pain of Its Absence. And then around 2000, I started continuing to look for the scientific basis that underpinned what makes the classical work. A lady called Schaeffer published a book about fractals. The classical is fractal. It was her PhD in some university in New York. And then Louise Schaffer. And then there was the Classical Council of Alexandria. John Massengale, who was one of the best guides in the broader sense of the word around, but also in the very narrow sense of walking you around places and looking at them, hosted several classical councils, which for me was like, boom, you know, it was just brilliant to be in a room with 100 other people that actually knew something about what I had no clue, and which I really thought was the most important thing in the world today for for urban survival. That's sort of the bottom line. I mean, why are we doing all of this? Because we think we'll have a better future. I got so frustrated, fast forward 10 years, I got so frustrated with the planning process in Portland, Maine. I found myself here after my folks died, and I wanted to write like a biography. I wrote one. It's called Sex, Love, and Architecture. It's never going to be published. I finished it on a Monday, and on Wednesday, I was writing The Art of Classic Planning. I wrote the first book of everything I did, mostly bad stuff, and the second book was Everything I Know. But what really pushed it was that the planning people here in Portland, they don't have a clue what they're doing. And it's a pretty little town, or at least it was. And it's getting increasingly abused by scale and materials that are inappropriate. And I wrote it for them. It's like, here, guys, do this. I know personally it has worked for give or take 5,000 years, and it should work for you too. I actually got hung up in the writing on 3 topics. One was the whole business of transport, which opened up the doors to technology. And what do we do with technology? Because we've been building cities and we have a pretty good idea what to do with them for 5,000 years, except the last 100, where we have been applying what we know. And we have been living very intensively with technology in the last 200 in a leapfrogging of technologies that actually is abusive of the technologies. Forget about people, forget about congestion, forget about traffic, forget about, internet spying and the fact that everybody in the universe is now watching this little thing, blah, 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 blah. Not people close to us and in here, but whatever, all that stuff. But actually, the technologies that were lost on the way and which might be necessary, not dissimilar to plants in the Amazon rainforest later on. And nobody is stewarding technologies, not for the last 200 years, where you did have the Compagnon, which was all about stewarding technology. I had a real problem with sprawl, and I invite you to read that section in the book. There is no such thing as sprawl. And I discovered that in Los Angeles, where I realized that, oh, really? I realized that Los Angeles and refugee camps in common are 1 to 2 stories, have an occasional high street, a smattering of commercial here and there. There is no civic sense, and everybody is there for their best perceived opportunity. The only difference is what people call standard of living. So the people in Phoenix, as opposed to the people in Kenya, in their camps, people in Phoenix have two cars and 2 boats and 2 houses, but they're all hawked to the gills. So the actual net worth of the individual in a refugee camp in Kenya and in Phoenix is likely very similar, just a standard of living thing different. And then the crafts, which Professor Webb, I think for about 5 months, we were talking about this very, at least once a week, twice a week. I was trying to read up on why is there such disregard for the crafts. And it turns out that it's an ancient thing. The Greeks thought the craftsmen were nothing, were dirt. And the miracle of the Parthenon was that it involved people, high-level craftsmen. It involved free people working, and involved slaves, but some of the slaves were skilled laborers, and some of the slaves were just schlepping rocks. But the miracle of the Parthenon is that in its construction, everybody was consulted. Here, come over here. What do you think about this? That's how they actually built it. And that's what we know from the stories. And that it was really as much as it was a mechanical, technical design and construction exercise, it was also a metaphysical experiment, because it came right after, I'm saying metaphysical, not in any kind of woo-woo spiritual sense, but in the simple philosophical sense, that the Greeks shortly before had documented their understanding of truth, beauty, and goodness being a unity. And that actually describes holism. And holism is if you change one, you're changing the others. And if you are measuring one, you're measuring the others. So the premise was, let's build the most beautiful thing we can and see what happens with regard to truth and goodness. And there's no doubt, first of all, the building is still here, despite some idiot Venetian admiral and the Turks, who really had no business using it as a storeroom. It's still here, and it still gives you a Stendhal effect. So
It's interesting you bring up that idea of like documentation and bringing. I think with those like heavily oral cultures, and I mean, of course, the Greeks were very, they wrote a lot as well. It wasn't just oral, but I think that that's in our modern times, as far as craftsmanship and architecture, we've had a hard time, and I experienced this in my own life when I first started kind of bumbling around trying to discover traditional methodology and classicism in architecture. There was this idea of, okay, where is the information? I mean, I'm a child of the internet, so I still understood, I understood that I had something that we never had before. So it kind of brings me into the next concept of the STOA and how we might be able to actually make that knowledge more easily accessible. Professor Webb, maybe I'll kind of tilt this toward you, but of course this is wide open at all times. I'm just merely trying to guide the boat in some certain sense. But what is the STOA? What are the fundamental concepts that ought to be considered when thinking about that kind of tradere, right? That kind of giving over of knowledge.
Yeah, the STOA, of course, is classicists. Most of us know what the STOA was in ancient Greece, in the agora. It was literally a platform, colonnade, where people would meet and discuss ideas. I mean, I think the most notable school of philosophy that came out of there were the Stoics. They get their name from meeting at the Stoa. But the Stoics began as followers of Socrates, and they met with the academy. Some of Plato's followers would come there. The Peripatetics would come from Aristotle's Lyceum later as well. So that's an interesting concept, because what you have in the academy and what you have in the Lyceum are two institutions, and we appreciate that those institutions existed. They created bases of knowledge that we still use and value today. But the STOA was not an institution as such. What it was a civic function. It was literally a platform where people from different institutions could meet. And in some cases, as with the Stoics, they would make their own movement out of it. So I think that's why I like to use the word STOA. Because what I do find is that we have many fine institutions. I can name some of them. We have INTBAU, incredible, global in scope. We have the Institute of Classical Architecture here in the US that does wonderful things in teaching and advocating for classical architecture. We have many universities that either have studios or full-blown programs. I mean, we had several professors from Notre Dame here yesterday. And so all of these institutions are like the academy, and they're like the Lyceum, and they're full of people that are holding this knowledge. And as well as individuals, people that are in practice, they're holding the knowledge too, So what we would like to provide, because there is a robust platform that is global in scope, a STOA, somewhere where everyone can gather, that has ground rules like we have had for this traditional architecture gathering. But the ground rules are not meant to be restrictive. They're merely there to create an atmosphere where we can have civilized debate. These things have been well established for you know, for a couple of thousand years, and what civilized debate constitutes. And it's very open, actually. It's encouraging conversation. It's encouraging us to work out disagreements. It's not about being not disagreeable. No, of course, we fight our ideas so that we don't have to fight with our fists. And so long as we're not attacking each other's person, then you know, I think most of these things are fair game, and you know, we need to, you know, work them out here kind of amongst ourselves first before we address the public. And that's what a STOA does. So so what we're talking about is something like a listserv, or maybe a news group, or maybe something even more robust than that. Things that I've heard before that people would like to see is more capacity for images, for video. There's also interest in building the platform in a way that people, there are certain divisions that make sense. Like, for example, for Spanish speakers, French speakers, they may want to have a part of that platform that is in their language. Why? Well, yes, we have the general pool where everybody is at, but you know, it's about communication. So if you can communicate more effectively in your own language, well, you need to have a place where you can do that, your own little section of the STOA. We also, you know, this type of platform though requires, I think, some support, some patronage. And some of that might be coming from literal patrons, and some of that might come from a subscription service. You know, maybe we need to have a little skin in the game. That's something that Dr. Burris feels very strongly about. And I think we also need patronage, something behind it. But what's important to me is that it's independent of our existing institutions. It's independent of universities. It's truly self-supporting. It's on its own. It's there to serve all of those institutions. It's not an institution itself. It is not a movement. It just is there to facilitate communication and then transmission of knowledge. At least that's my vision for the STOA.
I think that that Professor Webb's idea of a STOA, I think, goes beyond, you know, the wonderful thing about architecture is that it is both literal and metaphorical. The STOA is composed of a bunch of individual institutions, stores, shops, and an area into which they can expand with their goods, and where people can walk around and do other things. And the idea of having here these actually 5 zones, the service zone behind the store, the shop, the enclosed shop, the walking area here, the secondary or primary, whatever you want to call this, and then the open on the other side, is actually the model of what we're doing. So the CPI is this. We are here. The Notre Dame and ICA and NCAS and Intibau are these. And we're here simply a place for people to gather, discuss, without the bonds that might limit their expression or thinking necessarily imposed. And the STOA of the CPI is completely independent of the CPI. The CPI is the stones of this thing, not the space and the interaction of the people. So the platform for the holding the knowledge bases, the stewarding of the knowledge bases, which is our primary interest. And then the hosting of an unaffiliated platform, being the space in here, the conversation in here, is part of what we have 5 parts to the CPI, and this is one of them, and arguably the single most important one.
Yeah, that was the next point I was about to just come right into, was this idea of, you know, I like that idea that the STOA is kind of this supplemental resource for any and everybody. Like this is just kind of like really a library of Alexandria, as we've spoken of it in a certain way as far as the knowledge of it. And then, you know, since it's not an institution, the CPI has the word institute. It is an institute in and of itself. So is there a relationship to tag to the STOA through CPI, or is CPI just kind of over here? What is that relationship?
That relationship is most clearly identified in this list. There are 5 spokes to the CPI: studio, classes, library, research, and the STOA. In other words, we practice, we teach, we have an actual hard copy knowledge-based library. It's not all the publications ever created or written, but the ones that actually hold the knowledge that is useful, the classical knowledge bases. And then there's the research which would go into both basic science, like the neuroscience, at a, really push the envelope there, because the sequencing, what happens in your brain when you walk down the street, hasn't even begun, and we're a little bit stuck on other things. The STOA is the giving back to the community, just enabling a space, a safe space for everybody to be in, share the knowledge. I think that all the institutions, every single institution has a mission. Our mission is stewarding the knowledge.
And if I could interject,
Please.
I think the way that we're at least currently conceiving this idea of the STOA is one that is connected to the traditional architecture gathering we're having now. We want to build the platform in such a way that as these conversations are going back and forth on this platform, that people, have the facility to actually organize themselves and have to organize themselves and gather themselves together. So it should be, the idea of physical gatherings or virtual gatherings should be built right into the platform of kind of this online communication.
And that kind of brings me to a point of, I think maybe some of us are wondering, I've been able to experience a in-person tag as well as a virtual tag. And I think those of us that maybe tend toward the Luddite end of the spectrum were very kind of, we weren't quite sure about how this was going to work. I mean, I think it has worked amazing, quite frankly. I mean, there are a couple of little hiccups technologically, but other than that, is it something that perhaps will bring in more of that, of the technological aspect of it regarding these kind of smaller gatherings throughout the year, or some sort of way to create it? And does the tag gathering, in its essence, will it always maintain that kind of fraternal relationship amongst people where they come together physically? Do you think that's important?
We're facilitating what the community wants. I think there's probably going to be a place for both. People are obviously going to want to gather again together physically. I mean, I certainly am ready for that. I'm sure many of you are ready for that. But then, if we're talking like a global gathering, practically for most people, that's going to need to be virtual. I mean, we've had probably 300 at any given time, but up to 600 registered for this event. That's only, that has never happened before. And so I think that is set only to increase. We could really tie together people who have common interests around the globe through a platform like this, if it's robust enough. We need to build it right. We need to have some support for it.
There's no question about that. And also, I kind of see it as I want to go back to the garden party idea. And it's not a garden party anymore, because we actually are the stewards of the knowledge bases that likely are going to save urban and certainly urbane living on this planet at this point. And we do have access to the kind of knowledge that can help balance out town and country. Countryside disappeared in 1900 after people thought, Ebenezer Howard, they didn't understand what he was writing about, the necessity for it, and they simply stopped building countryside between urban fabric. Green zone, what's a green zone? What's a green belt? My belt's not green. I don't know what a green belt is. All these abstractions that came into the business. But the idea of the knowledge bases is what we are really holding here. And we started this actual tag force started back in December. It congealed around the idea of the fractal round table when it became evident to me that we need genuine science, not amateurish, let's call it science that we've had until now, playing with eye tracking glasses and all that stuff. It's really good, but was not real science. And we needed real science with our design work and all the other attributes that really holistic glom onto it. So without, how did we used to build waterfront? Waterfront was so abused in the 19th century, especially in the United States, that we don't have any idea how city wants to come up to water. What do we do with the countryside again, where we can actually, you can have mines and you can have high tension lines and you can have rail tracks and you can have trash dumps. You can have it in the countryside, but that's a tiny part of the countryside. You have to have nature and you have to have agriculture, and you can bring those in very close to community in a safe way if you do it right, as we learned from the COVID thing, where things are not being done right in that regard. It's sort of nature's boom back at building town and country wrong in a sense.
Mr. Duncan, Professor,
Yes.
how are we doing for time? I want to make sure that you know, we have some time for audience questions.
Yep, you're dead on. So I
there?
was just kind of clicking back through the chat while Dr. Burris was finishing his last thought there. And what I may do, if it's okay with you guys, is I may just kind of pull through here and see if I can find some. I mean, I've been kind of slowly paying attention over time. I know there's some good stuff in here. If it's okay with you guys, I may just click through and pose questions to you two and let the floor be open, if that's all right.
No, that's great. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So getting through people from all over the place. That's what's really interesting. That's an amazing part of this is the Zoom ability is to see where people from all over the world. It's truly amazing. So I've got some, and I'll just go through these a little bit. I've got one from Pedro here that says, it would be great to discuss the teaching of traditional architecture in the context of programs which are not entirely traditional, as opposed to Notre Dame. I'm sure Alessandro Camise and Alejandro Garcia Ermida will have much to contribute, and he's also willing to contribute as well. What do you think about that, right? The architecture in the context of programs which are not entirely traditional.
Well, I can speak to craft, because I'm not an architect. I'm going to defer to that to Dr. Burris, but I'll just quickly say that I've been able to present to particularly historic preservation programs, but some modernist programs as well, as a craftsman, talking about traditional craft. And it's kind of funny, they pity the traditional craftsmen. So we're almost like I don't know, we're almost like a protected class. They can't say anything bad about us because they really pity us. So it's an interesting way to get a back door into a lot of these institutions, because you can really strike up interesting conversations, particularly if you're versed in the classical Gothic tradition, through your work, which the students are fascinated with. I'll defer to Dr. Burris.
I agree. I agree with everything that Professor Webb says. I first agree, and then I discuss, because he often brings things as any craftsman would. He connects stuff, and it's always something worthwhile hearing in what he says. With regard to to design, look, there are umpteen styles of architecture around the world, classical, vernacular, from the last 5,000 years. All of them are valid. period. I don't see any reason to not to say no to any style. The real question is appropriateness. Is it appropriate to its context? And actually, truth, beauty, and goodness are timeless. Time doesn't actually attach to any of them. They're not relative. They don't change. So
I find it's some of the difficulty in that sometimes is right, because what we're talking about is pluralism, right? And the difficulty sometimes is we can't agree on, for instance, the nature of beauty, right? Where the more classically minded agree that maybe there is an objective sense of beauty, right? I always tell my students, convince me that a butterfly isn't beautiful, right? And that's anecdotal and kind of a trickery question, but I find that, I was in New York and staying with some grad students from Yale, and they knew I was going to Notre Dame. And so we had started having conversations. And what oftentimes is you kind of hit that impasse, for instance, with beauty or something where you actually don't agree principally. And so you can't have a meaningful conversation. I wonder if tag might be that opportunity to bring two people that are willing to have a decent conversation from different perspectives to talk about these and to see if there is some movement there. I think there's some danger sometimes in being an ideologue. So I wonder if that might be a topic for tag. I mean, that's not quite what this question was, but maybe that's something going forward that we can consider, and inviting people from outside of the garden, if you will. I think it would be very interesting.
what I meant by the garden,
Well, I'm
and to
sorry.
answer what I meant by the garden, and to answer your question, is that we have round tables. We have tables in this party. Some people are talking about crafts. Some people are talking about beauty. Some people are talking about neuroscience. Some people are talking about the future. Who knows anything about classic traffic planning? What does it really mean to walk through a place? We have the potential for all of these conversations, and the beauty thing that you mentioned now, of course, is essential. What I've found in conversations like this, especially with the scientists, is that we actually talk past each other in the sense that we use different terminology for the same things, and or have have different meanings for the same words, like sublime in English and in German mean completely different things. So we really, one of them would be for tag is, to really understand what we are doing. And we have many, we are the blind men describing the elephant, except that courtesy of Zoom and the internet, we're not just 5, we are 500. And we can come to agreement with regard to, the only thing I can think of is Nicene Conference, in the sense of, let's figure out what we're doing, because if we don't, as a community of all of our institutions, we're not strong enough. Not one single institution in the classical world is strong enough to sustain itself.
Yeah, I would just add to that very briefly that I think agreement sometimes is too high of a bar. Sometimes in these debates, we're exploring an idea. So if we can receive consensus, literally getting what the other person is saying, even if you don't agree, hearing them out, perhaps even taking their side, a little bit, and working the argument through, is helpful.
Absolutely. So I'm seeing that idea really kind of Robert Krasser, some other people down the line as I go, are really echoing this idea of having conversations outside of our own people, which I think is maybe, I mean, that sounds like a really great idea. Also, Bert Bart brings up the idea of the STOA being offered in different language communities, not just the kind of separate tab, I'm sorry, that's for the certain language community, but maybe the STOA in general
Yes.
might be helpful to be also in the different languages. So that should be certainly an aspect of it.
Yeah, we've already kind of started that discussion. As it happened, we have many native Spanish speakers on this program, and we only had a couple of months to bring everything together. Had I had just a bit more time, I think we would have had breakout sessions in Spanish so that we could have reached out to, for example, not only Spain, Portugal, but all of Latin America. Obviously there's going to be students maybe don't speak English there, or other practitioners, and that will be in the future, I think, a great opportunity. We had a speaker on my panel that was a native speaker of, obviously he's in China. I mean, they're building like mad, a large population. So I could imagine opening up these opportunities, and that's why the platform needs to be robust and built well, and maybe have a bit of patronage and a steward that's kind of taking care of it, because it could do so much globally.
Absolutely.
I would like to put in a word, if I may.
Please.
That we should go a little slow on separate language communities. Clearly, there are a great many things being done in Latin America that are very, very agreeable to many people here, and everything that was said was agreeable. But having now concerned myself with what's happening in France for some time, I think that one reason why there is so little knowledge in general in this group about what's happening in France is the language barrier. Spanish is a very common second language in the United States. French was in my generation, but it no longer is. People don't speak French, and they don't know what's going on in Paris in architecture. And the French people don't know what's going on in England either. And to have them separated, it seems to me, is less useful, at least for part of the time, for not knowing what people's different ideas are. For a comparison, let me point out that in Paris, there is a group, there is a wonderful organization for high-tech development. And the common language is not French. People are there from all over the world. Young people are there from all over the world. And to the great regret of the French, the common language is English. I respectfully suggest, and clearly this is not the opportunity for discussing the whole topic, but let me just at this early point say that there are arguments against having separate languages, because that's also separate history, separate knowledge, with due respect. And I'm going to mute myself now and just leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you for hearing me out.
No, Ms. Gallagher, if I could just clarify, are you suggesting that the platform would be better in English only?
I am suggesting that if what we want is common knowledge, unfortunately, at this point in the world's history, that's English. It's not Latin. It's not French. It's English at this point. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your comment. I appreciate it. It's interesting. It's something we'll have to explore. I have had a number of requests for people who would really like to have a place within the STOA which they could have conversations in their own language, and they seem to feel that they could bring in people. Perhaps they themselves are bilingual, but they're connected with many colleagues who are not, and not comfortable speaking on an English platform. So how do we reach those people? That's an unresolved question.
I think it's a really good point. At the end of the day, each language is a window, a unique window to the world. You can say things in Spanish you can't say in English and French, and can say things obviously in English you can't say in all the other languages, and so on and so forth. Each language also implies a method of thinking. The fact that we're doing all this stuff in English is not by accident likely if you start recognizing the differences between the languages and so on. So yes, I think what we actually need to do is educate ourselves in the other languages, and maybe that's part of the tag thing, is to be multilingual, period.
I think that this is, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, this sounds like this is certainly something to put on the tag 5.
There you go.
Without question. I mean, this is kind of what we're doing. I came across a few more, and I'm only pushing it a little bit because I see new messages keep clicking up, and I want to get through as many as we can.
Please, yeah.
I found one, Christopher Fagan talks about the idea of the, kind of the reformation of zoning and building codes, while also expanding the classical education. And Mark Hewitt kind of seconds that and thinks that that should be absolutely. And I mean, Dr. Burris, this is right up your alley. I mean, we talk about this all the time, whether it's materiality or, building and zoning, how do we, certain professors that I won't mention would teach us to not break the rules, but find ways around the rules in order to get things done. So I certainly think that as far as a pragmatic topic, that reforming building and zoning along with how it's affected by classical thought should be something to think about. Professor Westphal also talks about a fundamental need to is outreach to those who transmit ideas and examples of architecture to the general public. The example being the Shelter magazine, popular press critics, television critics, and reporters who are now constantly telling people new means modern, means modernist, and disdain traditional and classical architecture, which is anti-progress, I guess. And where does a publicity program fit in the STOA? That was an interesting, I don't know if y'all thought about that.
One of the things that Robert Adams said, first of all, I'm seeing these comments and there's a lot of them. I would rather hear them spoken rather than need to read them in a chat window. And one of the things that Robert Adams said, it's very important to recognize that we are part of a constellation of organizations. Absolutely. We recognize that we profess this is a grassroots meeting. This is the CPI is not TAG. CPI is hosting TAG. TAG, next time, let's have Intibau host TAG. And next time, the ICA host TAG and revolve around. We don't own TAG. We are the grassroots. Everybody else is territorial. And we could see this. You did not have representation by Intibau US and by NCAS here. I actually asked the leaders of those two movements to share a panel, and they refused to talk to each other on the same panel. We are the safe place for everybody.
If I can speak, am I allowed to unmute at that point, seeing as you quoted me?
Yes, please.
Yes, it's okay.
Of course.
I mean,
Thank you. Thank you.
I take the point. The whole issue is that there's the ICA, there's INTBAU, there's the other TAG, the Traditional Architecture Group in the UK, and there are probably others. And at the moment, most of those are closely associated with one another. INTBAU has a World Congress, which is coming up at the end of this year, COVID permitting, which is closely associated with the COP conference on sustainability. So there are other STOA out there, and it is. I would say that basically we all have one common objective, and it is very, we must not dissipate our energies. We must coordinate our energies. I mean, INTBAU has set itself out to be precisely that. We've got 7,500 members around the world and 33 national chapters. So it's there. It is actually called a network. It's precisely that. And so it is there to be used as a network. I mean, I can't speak for anything that's led up to this, but let us hope that we can actually make sure that all of these organizations become a coordinated constellation.
Well,
I will mute myself.
Coordinated constellation. So let Intibau host a Nicene conference, so to speak, of all of our institutions. For example, what the CPI recognizes and CNU does not, and the Alexandrine method does not, and both of those are sort of promoted by other organizations, is that architecture is very important in urbanism. And we also recognize the difference between the classical, traditional, and the vernaculars and all that good stuff. Look, there's a lot of overlap between
I will say that INTBAU is doing precisely that. towards the end of
It
the year.
seems to on the
And
surface.
and its theme is longevity and sustainability and tradition and the vernacular. So basically, please, it's there to be joined in on. So that's just part of the coordination. I'm pleased to have the
I
opportunity
think
to
you're
say
right.
this.
I think you're right. And let's do it institution to institution. But if Intubau is already there, let Intubau invite us in a meaningful way to work together. And I say the same thing to the ICA and to NCAS and everybody else. We're not against anything. We're creating a safe place coming from the grassroots, not or allowing for it. It's not the CPI. This is TAG.
Well, the invitation is out there and exists, so it's out there to be had. We'll broadcast it again.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Patrick.
would like to reiterate a point and also a division somewhat between the Classic Planning Institute, which I'm involved with. It's doing many things, and I'm happy to be a part of it. But it is an institution in the same sense that INTBAU is an institution and the ICA are institutions, which are all doing wonderful work. It's very important, at least with my original vision of what I see TAG and the STOA as being non-institutional. That's the point of it, that it's not an institution. It doesn't have an agenda other than serving as a platform of communication that is non-hierarchical, and anyone can communicate with anyone at any time. And hopefully out of that, grassroots movements, or not movements, rather gatherings like the one we're having now, can be generated organically. I would say that's something that's kind of missing. Many of it's not that the other work that's being done isn't fine work. Like to have put on conferences where there's an agenda and many things are being covered is important. But it's being done. It's being done by many institutions. And but this type of grassroots, where we're all kind of talking to one another on some sort of platform that's non-hierarchical, and out of that is coming topics that we want to just gather together and discuss, kind of with our hair down, a little bit more informal. That's what TAG is all about. It's
well, don't misunderstand INBO. It is an internet. It is a network. It is not hierarchical at all. It's an equal platform of all its national chapters. So basically, we're on the same page on this, and it's very important that we stay on the same page. There is no hierarchy. There is no hierarchy in it. It is just a network for people coming together, which is another word for grassroots. So we're trying to do the same sort of thing. So we should do it together.
Yeah, I certainly agree.
That's why we're all in this room.
Can I jump in here?
Together.
Yes, please.
4 things. The chat from these 3 days has got a lot of goodies in there. And I've never been an administrator of a Zoom conference, so I don't know if you can select all and put that to a PDF.
Try doing it. It might work for you.
Okay, number 2. No, it's 3 days. I don't have the recording. The second thing is, I learned yesterday the recording isn't going to be available till April 1st. And I'm sure you have your reasons for doing that, but this weekend, I'm thinking classical architecture, and I want to think about what someone said on Friday night, and I can't do that because I can't access the recording. So I'd like you to reconsider it. You don't have to answer now, but two things about the conversation right now. Regarding what Mary said about the languages, I'd like to propose a very simple, old school method way of sharing the information from this conference without the recordings. I wish every presenter could write 1 page of their main points, and then that's posted. It can then be translated into Spanish, French, Turkish, Swedish, etc. And people can see that. And when the recording comes out, you just link the recording in there. And 4th, Congress for New Urbanism has 25 years into the zoning reform action. And it sounds like there's not enough cross-pollination between talking about the enormous support of traditional architecture it's in the whole DNA, it is rare to not have a traditional architect or architecture, vernacular, regional architecture promoted in any of these codes. So I don't know if that really should be an initiative on the part of this forum, but I think cross-pollination is important. And lastly, as maybe the only no, there's like 4 CNU people here today. We do believe architecture is vital to forming urban spaces. So knock that off, Nerburos.
Oh, actually, on the last point, I believe you are dogmatically mistaken. I know that you like traditional architecture, but I would go and discuss that back with Dwani. We're all here because of Dwani at some level, by the way, because he got us involved and busy doing things. So kudos to Andres.
One last point. I notice we don't have our elder statesmen here like Alvin Holm and John Blateau, et cetera, et cetera. I went to the extent of contacting Alvin yesterday. So please, for the next time, let's invite the people that we are truly grateful to have had as our teachers, because they love this just as much as we do, and we need to have them in the conversation. Thank you.
I think the big deal, at least for me, from hearing the students and hearing other people talk, is that we really need new paradigms for how to teach what we're teaching. We need new paradigms in the practice, apparently. I think that the 21st century has shown us that some of the methods of the 19th that we tried to drag into the 21st are not going to work for us as traditionalists. And I'm inviting people to discuss those things, the education, the practice, the craft, and so on and so forth in Tag 5, and come to roundtables at the CPI discussing all those things, including people from all the other organizations.
Thank you for alluding to that. I just want to kind of take it back just for a second real quick to like make sure it feels like certain things are being conflated. But what this is particularly about is about those roundtables, exactly as you just mentioned, Dr. Burris, like this idea of we really want topics, like all of this sounds fantastic. And I think sometimes with institutions, which TAG is not, and the STOA is not, with institutions, they're made up of human beings, right? Individuals that have their own ideas. Like Ms. Johnson talked about this idea of that she seems to love traditional architecture, right? But maybe the organization at large, that is not necessarily a tenet that is abided. But that seems like a beautiful topic for a roundtable, right? And then also Professor Adam talking about, bringing a full understanding about what INTBAU is to everyone, what ICAA is to everyone, what CPI is to everyone, and how they do relate. I don't think anyone is saying, oh, keep them out, bring them in. I think that the kind of essence of TAG in reality is the idea of bringing all of that together. And how do we do that? Because we're all on the same side. Like, we see the value and human purpose in traditional architecture and the crafts. Go ahead, Dr. Burris. Yeah.
I don't speak as well to some of these theoretical issues as others. And I'm very passionate, but I am a little more of a practical kind of minded person. The idea of having a listserv that is not University of Miami listserv, that's under the DIE principles, and is not a Facebook page under the vicissitudes of Facebook and whoever is running the pages, but is owned by TAG itself, TAG members. We need our own platform for these conversations, independent of any institution. And I'd like to bring that up to a vote.
Okay. I just noticed the 2 hands. I think Juan Rosales maybe just went off. So I'll go to you, Bruce Donnelly, if you have a question or a statement. You're muted, Bruce. You're muted.
sorry. It seems like we have a schism that unless it, or a dichotomy or just a gap that unless it's addressed, this whole thing is, it's going to be very hard for it to go anywhere. And that's the gap between the people who basically reject modernism. They like Nico Salingaros and Michael Mahaffey and Christopher Alexander. They talk about geometrical qualities, scale qualities, that sort of thing, but it's style agnostic. I think that's a really important word, is style agnostic. It's style agnostic principles. And then there's classicism, the more higher, more refined classicists who think that Greco-Roman classicism refines those principles so much that dabbling in anything else is something that only masters should do. And by the way, we probably don't have any masters who can do that now. So we have a gap between the people who are willing to engage the entire world of options and that is healthy and not modernism, and the people who are willing to, or who insist on a classical centric view, and everything else you go out beyond that is something that's really tentative, and it's you know, it's like roots going out. As roots go out, they get thinner. And this is not a new phenomenon. You have people like Rudolf Arnhem and people like that who found universal principles, even you know, going right back to 100 years ago, with or older, who found universal principles. And if you take all of those universal principles at once, you start to develop the exact same principles that somebody like, you know, the 15 properties of, I forget what it is, but the Christopher Alexander's 15 properties, you start to reconstruct something traditional if you take all of those principles. And this has been a schism that's really happened, I'd say, since the late 19th century. People started dealing with sort of universal theories of composition around 100 years ago or 110 years ago. And Christopher Alexander and Nikos Salingaros and those people have been doing the hard work of getting those principles straight. And I'd say that now we're in a sort of moment of resurgence where native non-classical peoples in Africa, South America, and Asia are not recognized and don't have any real outlet. And then there's the classical tradition, which is very, very important. But unless the people within that tradition can deal with the people outside of it, I don't think there's a way forward. I think it's a permanent schism.
I'd like to make a comment on that, Bruce, if I could. I think
Patrick, I just want to make sure that, oh, he went away. Please make your comment. But if Juan Rosales comes back up, I think his hand was up for a long time and I didn't see it.
yes.
So right after you speak, I'm going to go back to him if he pops back up. Okay.
Okay.
Excuse my.
I think, Bruce, I've been spending my summers in Morocco and intend to do that for the ongoing future, mainly to study geometry and some of their plaster methods. But I'm encountering the same thing. Just as we have Greco-Roman classicists, they have Islamicists, as we're talking about for architecture and art, you know, and they're very beholden to those traditions, and they feel they're the best, and they are pretty good. That's why I'm over there studying them. And so what I'm talking about doing with them is actually bringing them into the conversation. And I would love to have a platform where, you know, their design principles and their history is kind of married to what we're doing. INTBAU is doing, speaking of INTBAU, they've done a lot in that regard as well. And so I would encourage that. And many of them are only Arabic speaking. So that was the idea with the language came in, that, you know, some of them are bilingual, but many are not. And if there's a way to transmit that kind of knowledge, which is being lost right now. They're being challenged by modernism, and it's coming out of left field for them. They've never seen anything like it before. And it's like destroying their craft traditions, destroying their geometrical traditions. You know, the idea of working with kind of the theorists like Christopher Alexander, I feel, you know, I've dabbled in that world too. Being out in California, I kind of got involved with that in the straw bale community, in the, you know, the earth building community, because, you know, many of them had kind of grown up with Christopher Alexander in a pattern language, and that's when I kind of encountered it. And I think obviously the work there done is having value, and it's beginning to, you know, of course, it takes time for these different worldviews to kind of integrate. But I think it is happening. Maybe Professor Salingaros might want to make a comment on that, the progress that he's seen in his career. But I feel that there's been progress there, even if there are those that are kind of entrenched.
Let me just say, or kind of echo and support that. I'd say that looking at the entire world, the Spanish and North African tradition. First of all, Spain already absorbed a lot of Moorish architecture. But the Spanish tradition, because it had to deal with South America and also like the Philippines, and the Portuguese tradition has to deal with, it's basically the biggest country in South America, Brazil. And a lot of people don't know that there's a lot of overlap in a place called Goa in India. So there's a lot of Spanish and Portuguese crossover. And right now, there's a lot of crossover between Northern Africa and the Sahel and South, because of Muslim tradition, Muslim religion is moving south in Africa. So especially in Nigeria, but also in the Sahel, you're winding up with desertification, pushing people from a wood tradition into a stone and brick tradition. So those building traditions are actually moving south. And in a very literal sense, they're literally building vaults there because they can't build with wood anymore. So that's moving south. So it's really, the key is the Northern African tradition and the Spanish and Portuguese traditions.
Fantastic. I think this is going to certainly be one of the roundtables going forward. I mean, building methodology and cultural impact outside of the kind of Greco-Roman tradition, it should be at the forefront of what we're talking about, and certainly is something we talk about in our smaller circles. I have to go to Mr. Rosales. If you're here, please, you have the floor. I know you've been waiting a while.
Thank you very much. As I was hearing everybody this morning, Professor Webb and Dr. Burras telling their story on how they came to be here, I was thinking how I came to be here. And me being a stubborn, passionate modernist when I was coming out of school, completely disregarding the classical and the traditional architecture, fascinated by Cooper Union and pursuing that, and how I ended up coming up here. To tell you the truth, the reason is very mundane, is money. I shared the experience. I was talking the other day to Professor Jaden Bolt, that we shared the experience in our formative years that we went and worked for developers. And what seduced me was the new urbanist movement, because it was the theory of Leon Krier being applied to the real estate market in a successful way in the United States. And it was the plug and play version of Leon Krier ideas. And I was telling the other day to Dr. Burras that I always thought that Leon Krier was the Einstein of the new way of urbanism. and that Andres Duane was the Bill Gates, you know, because he was able to sell it. My primordial question is, the mission of this institution is to the stewardess of the knowledge, or also the reapplication of the knowledge, the reutilization, the selling of the knowledge, again, to put it in fashion, to sell it to developers, to find our mecenas. And for that, we probably should do the same as the urbanists did. You know, the CNU is 30 years old and is very successful. We can't deny it, you know, and we probably should look at it, you know, its trajectory, how it began. Where is our Robert Davies, you know, our developer that embraces us, or embraces these ideas, you know? Are these ideas only theory and for high educated academy, or are they sellable? You make money with them business wise? Is intelligent? Is intelligent in? Can we switch also? Can we seduce the rest of the people? That's my observation. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Yeah, Patrick, I'll give you the last comment. We have to end in 1 minute. It's done at 12:20. I'm sure we would all love to sit here for the rest of the day.
Mr. Rosales.
Please.
You know, the knowledge that we have, it's in people, it's in the individuals. And so I don't envision the STOA as even being a steward of the knowledge as such. It just creates a platform, a very robust platform where the transmission of knowledge can take place. That's all. So like you said, there's someone who needs to take these wonderful ideas and create movements out of them. And maybe movements can come out of traditional architecture gatherings and the conversations that we have, or the online platform where we're having an ongoing conversation. But they are not the movement themselves. They are not the institution that's going to make that happen. We have fine institutions already, and maybe we're going to build some more. And we just want to be there to help that knowledge be transmitted from one generation to another, to connect people that are not formally connected, to help other language groups in other countries. This is a worldwide issue now. The industrial exploitation of the planet is global now. It's not a country phenomenon or a developed world phenomenon. So we want to be able to kind of unify people from across the globe so that they can talk to each other, but not tell them what to do.
Beautiful. Okay. Thank you so much to everyone that has given such impassioned comments and reviews. It's always such a pleasure to have a really kind of like hard conversation that's also respectful, which I think everyone did. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of it. Thank you, Dr. Burris. Thank you, Mr. Webb. It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much to everyone else as well. And I hope the rest of you have a good day.